Okay, so now this morning we have Shane Moffitt, the Assistant CISO for the Victorian Department of Premier and Cabinet, talking to us about the training in the whole of Victorian government. Please welcome Shane.
Fantastic, thank you very much. So one slight correction, the role's actually the whole of Victorian government role. So the way the Victorian government structured is we have the departments and the entities, and our role is, while it's based inside the Department of Premier and Cabinet, is actually looking at the entirety of Victorian government, which is relevant to some of the slides. Sorry?
Is the computer locked?
No? Oh yeah. Excellent. So yeah, as it says on the tin, this conversation or this presentation is around what we're doing in Victorian government as a whole of Victorian government deployment of training and awareness. So today's presentation is I'll talk you through the story today. It's certainly not a finished story and something I expect that's going to go on for quite a number of years. So the start of this was, I started this role about 15 months ago, and I probably should stop walking around because I feel like I'm causing an echo. I'm going to walk over here. So I started, no, that's worse. So I started this role about 15 months ago, and one of the key activities I had to do was deliver the state cybersecurity strategy. And there was two lines in it, and the first, there was a number of different actions in it, but there was two relevant actions. And the first was to develop and operate and communicate engagement program for cyber security awareness within government. And the second was establish with VMIA a cyber capability uplift program, including cybersecurity training, education events, programs, and seminars. So these two immediate questions came to my mind was, who the hell's VMIA? And the second was, what's the difference between training and awareness? Because they've listed them as separate actions, and probably historically, in my mind, they've mainly been the same thing. So I had to deliver this, and what I needed to do to get my head around what we had to do was I wanted to develop a framework, and I needed some questions asked before we could get started. And these were my questions. I wanted these questions answered before we started. And the first one was, what do we want to achieve from the training? I don't want to tick off boxes. I don't want to just go, training done, tick. Awareness done, tick. It needs to be more than that. And while it might be obvious what you want to achieve, everyone's obvious is a little bit different, and sometimes it's very different. So unless you can clearly define what you want to achieve, everyone's just going to go off on their different paths. So really want to be clear with us about what clearly are we trying to do. The second thing is, I wanted to know who are we training. The Victorian government's a fairly large beast, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But the key thing is, I wanted to be really clear about, before we went forward, is who are we training? The third was, what's the difference between training and awareness? And the fourth question is, I needed to have comfort that we would be able to measure if we were successful or not. We would need to know whether this worked or not before we started. So if it works, great, we keep doing it. If it doesn't work, we change. So I wanted those four questions answered before we started. So we've adopted a particular model on how we define what we want to achieve. And what it's called, it's a behaviour-based model. And under this model, there's only two reasons you do training and awareness. There's only two reasons, and they universally apply, right? The first one is you want to start a behaviour that's not currently occurring. And by behaviour, we have really broad definitions. We can be incredibly micro. So for example, to use a simplified example, if you're training people how to drive, you go, the behaviour we want is we want them to keep to the left-hand side of the white line. Really simple, very specific, very easy to measure. Another behaviour is we only want people to go into an intersection when it's safe, right? Far more complex, but it's still a behaviour. So that's the model we use, all right? So one reason is to start a behaviour. The second reason is to stop a behaviour. if people are doing things we don't want them to do, right? And that can be, people might be misclassifying data, right? And they might be calling it a secret when it should be for official use only, or it can be anything else. But everything that we've come across can fit into these two categories. I've never come across a situation where we can't define our objective as either trying to start or stop a behaviour. So how do we choose the behaviours that we want? So we can't do everything, right? And our program is not intended to replace the training for all public servants inside of the Victorian government. The entity is too big. But what we want to do is choose the behaviours and the investment that's going to produce the most returns, right? So there's a cost of labour and money that goes into developing training. The biggest cost is the actual time of the person sitting there doing the training, right? The $100,000, $500,000 you go into creating it is actually the cheapest part of the training. The cost is taking a police officer off the streets and sitting in front of a computer, or taking a nurse off from doing rounds. That cost massively exceeds the cost of actually developing the training. So we needed to be smart on what we're doing. So we just looked at what is actually causing the harm now. And we're very fortunate inside the Victorian government that our office has a central incident registry. So any incident that occurs to any entity inside the Victorian government, they're supposed to notify us and we record it. Sometimes we assist, depending on requirements. Sometimes we coordinate if there's multiple entities being affected. But ultimately, we seek to have visibility over all incidents. And we get pretty good reporting. We hope it to be better over time, but we get pretty good insight. So we look through that to see what's causing the harm. And then it's what we call a lagging indicator. Right? We also look at what's going to cause harm. So we know we have, so the Victorian government, like many large enterprises, has an issue with ICT asset management and currency and keeping things up to date in what we call legacy kit. We know that will cause harm. So we want to get proactive on that and getting people to actually address it before the harm's caused. So looking forward, you have less certainty than you do have looking back. So you need to be confident that the impact and likelihood is higher than your lagging indicators, and you want to balance the two off. All right. So after all that, I was comfortable that we would be able to clearly define what we wanted to achieve. The next question that we had, or I had, was who are we training? And I'd been inside of Victorian government before, and I consulted into government over quite a few years. But I didn't really grasp the size of Victorian government until I started this role and took on a whole of Victorian government role. Does anyone hazard to guess how many people are employed by the Victorian government?
60,000.
60,000?
400,000.
Sorry?
400,000.
Closer. Is, as of 2017, it's 311,353 people.
How many people live in Victoria?
I do not know. In the state of those, because not all those people live in Victoria. We have offices around the world. The state of Victoria, I think there's about 5 million. I do know it is about 8 to 9% of the Victorian workforce.
6.3.
6. All right, fantastic, excellent.
359.
Yeah. So it's a lot of people, right? And what you'll notice is, like, the departments, people think of the government as the departments. And the vast majority of the government is not the departments. It's the schools, it's the hospitals, it's the arborists. These is the Victorian government. The office workers in the back are basically the back-end office. So we needed to break this workforce down, right? We needed a way of separating it across that was simple but effective. And basically we copied what we'd done for our ICT strategy. And we created 3 personas. And the first persona is executives. And these are decision makers inside of an organisation, right? And this can be a secretary, this can be a judge, this can be a CIO or a chief role or a head of role. The title's fairly irrelevant. The key aspect is they have been entrusted to deliver outcomes for the Victorian public and given X amount of resources, and they need to make decisions on how those resources are allocated. So, for example, people who run the hospitals go, do I invest in a penetration test or do I buy a new heart monitor? Those are the decisions they need to make. So that was the first persona. Second persona is ICT workers, and this is anyone who has an IT job, and this can be your entry-level help desk operators right up to your CIO. And your CIO sits in both categories, right? They are both an executive and an ICT worker, so there is overlap. And the final persona is everyone, is anyone who works for the Victorian government in any role. And this is an incredibly diverse group, and I would suggest it's one of the most diverse workforces in Australia. Any metric you care to use, we are at both ends, and a lot in the middle, on whether it's age, education. We have teams that are exclusively made up of PhDs and higher educated people. We have places of our workforce that don't have a Year 9 education, right? And English may be their second or third language. We have that full spectrum, and we need to cater for that and plan for that. All right. My next question was, what's the difference between training and awareness? And I really wanted that clear in my mind. Now, this is my favourite diagram in all the world. And I have seen many, many diagrams. And it's been my favourite diagram for the last 2 years, and I think it'll stay for a while. And it's called the fog diagram, and it's about behavioural change. And if you look at this area, this is success and this is failure. And this is about whether a behaviour change occurs or not. And there's two components to achieving behaviour change. That is someone's motivation to do it and someone's capability to do it. So there's a really, and to simplify the example of this is, if I was to go to Max, who's on my team in there, and I'll go to Max and go, give me $10 now and I'll give you $1,000 by the end of the day. Max is both capable of doing that, and if he believes that I would actually give him the $1,000 at the end of the day, he's probably highly motivated to do it. If I was to go to Max and go, give me $1,000 and getting nothing in return, he might be capable of doing it, but his motivation's zero. So he's unlikely to do it. The other way goes around in the sense that you can raise people's motivation, but they may not have the capability to do it. So the other example is, I could go to Max and go, give me $1 million in the next 15 minutes, or we're going to launch a nuclear attack on the state of Victoria. And if he believed me, he might be highly motivated to do it, but there's very few people in the world that have the ability to come up with $1 million in 15 minutes. Even though it's with the money. So we need to understand what are we trying to do. So with this is, and this is where awareness and training separates. We mainly use awareness to drive motivation, to make someone want to do it. And we mainly use training to increase a person's ability to do it. So it's a capability spectrum. So the other aspect is, when you're talking about the workforce, is we're talking about a lot of people. And there's going to be a point where it's good enough. We're not going to get our behaviour change in the entire workforce. But what we're trying to do is this. We're just trying to move that a bit. And we can move that a bit, that will have a big impact. And there's a lot of people who have changed their behaviour. But we need to know in ourselves and define in ourselves what is our acceptable level and what's effective. Because you're at a point of the investment point of diminishing returns, as in you need to spend more and more and more to get a smaller and smaller people across the line. And my final question was, how are we going to know if this worked? So, we once again looked at our objectives and we looked at what happens in the market or in practice. And we use a 0 to 3 model on measuring the effectiveness of it. And the first one is, fairly common. And that is unstructured, no plan or monitoring. That is your posters in the lobby, that's your random intranet articles, that's your availability to training with no tracking, no knowledge of who's doing it, if it's effective, whether there's comprehension or not. And while it seems really bad, it's actually a really common thing. I'm sure you've all sat there, known that there's intranet articles or random emails that come out and not really known about whether it's worked or not. The next level is level 1, and that's where we track distribution. And the most common example of this is induction training. All right, you sit there, you spend your day, you spend your half day, you spend your 2 weeks, depending on the organisation. And you sit there and you go through everything and you go, tick, done. All right, and they track who's done it. And this can be instructor-led training, this can be web-based learning modules, it can be any mechanism. But it's just, have you done the training or not? The next level, and this is where we're getting to, but I want to go higher, is comprehension. And that's, you do the training, there's a test at the end. You need to score so well to move on, to be successfully have done it. And then once again, the most common form of this is your web-based learning module. You log in, you do it, you click through as quickly as possible, and you tick some boxes at the end. And if you've done, so in a former life, I was a consultant and I have done hundreds of these things. And I got through them in record time and got straight to the questions at the end. And it tracked comprehension. And that's pretty good. But where I want us to get to, and we're certainly not there yet, is I actually want to track the behaviour change. I actually want to baseline what the behaviour is and how often it occurs before we roll out, and then I want to track it after we roll out. And that is our objective. We're certainly not there yet, but that's the only way I can go hand on heart, I have confidence and go, I know this has worked. Everything else I can go, I think it's working, or I think it's not working. But until we actually get to level 3, I can't say with any confidence, I can't say confidently that I know it works. All right. So, have my framework. Actually start working on training. Those bits. So this is what it looks like. So the behaviour changes that we decided on was we wanted our executives to reduce the amount of times they succumb to phishing scams or whaling scams. I'm sure all your entities have it. The Victorian government is a large enterprise. I think the budget this week was approximately $70 billion in revenue or expenditure. A lot of money goes through the Victorian government, attractive target. But in the government, we also have other entities that are very interested in getting access to our senior people. And we know through our incident log that phishing or whaling is a common way that occurs. The second thing is, and this was a more esoteric one, is we wanted people to make more informed cyber decisions. And that's stretching the behaviour aspect, but it does work. And that was based on the fact that we saw many things that we considered bad decisions, or the outcomes of bad decisions. And they were made at the executive level. And talking to a lot of people is apparently the decision hadn't been made at the executive level. Apparently the decision hadn't formally been made at all because the executives had pushed down the decision making because they didn't feel comfortable in the space. So to make those decisions occur, and the conversations we've had with the executives and people interacted with them, was we identified there was a need to skill up these people to be able to make informed decisions. On to the next persona, which was our ICT workers. And that was, we wanted to increase patching of operating systems, right? Really basic hygiene. It's not glamorous, but it works, right? The amount of incidents that occur, and I'm sure everyone's in the same boat, of just missing patches frustrates me to the nth degree, and we wanted to increase that. And progressively, we're going to push all the Essential 8 and push those through the spectrum. And the second activity is we want to increase and improve the quality of reporting to us as cyber incidents. And across the entire public sector, we want to reduce the amount of times they succumb to phishing scams. Our incident register shows approximately 56% of our incidents would have been prevented if someone had not succumbed to a phishing scam. Right. It's ridiculous, but that's what the evidence is showing us, so that's where we're going to put some energy and effort. We're never going to get to zero. We don't expect to get it to zero, but what we're going to do is we are confident if we can reduce that by 10% or 20% or 50%, it's worth the investment in both the incidents themselves and the cost of managing those incidents. So we started doing that, and then we worked out we'd picked the wrong behaviour changes, because we spoke to our ICT workers and we went, patch. Go and patch. You know you need to patch. And they go, yeah, I know I need to patch, but I can't because the equipment's out of date. Right? And why is the equipment out of date? Because my executive won't give me the money to upgrade it. So we changed our behaviours. And we went then to decide we want the executives to stop sweating the assets. All right. And the reason they're doing, and sweating the assets is if something's got a 5-year lifespan, you put it in for 8 years. Right? And we spoke to the executives and we go, why are you doing this? Right? Now I'm simplifying a lot of conversations here. And they went, well, I got a proposal and they wanted $1 million or $10 million or $100 million. And they said, the system's old, we need a new one. All right, I'm going to need a bit more than that. And they went, well, we'll do that. I said, what new features will we get? Nothing substantial. What efficiency gains will we get? Nothing substantial. Will the cost to run it go down? And he went, no, it'll actually go up because we'll actually be able to patch it as opposed to the old one, which we can't patch, so that costs us nothing to keep there. So as a CFO, I'm going, you want $10 million and my costs are going to go up and our output's going to stay the same. No. So what we're trying to do is introduce risk into this conversation. And we want our executives to have visibility of the risk. Because there are sometimes sweating the asset is the right call. And there are times when it's the wrong call. And we can't go in with a global rule to say thou must keep thy ICT current. Right? Because sometimes it's not worth spending the $100 million. Sometimes that money is better spent on doctors and nurses and roads and all the other good things the Victorian government does. Right. So this is the breakdown of what we did with the executive persona. Right. So with reducing the number of times they're coming to whaling scams, we're creating a web-based learning module. It's going to be short and sharp and it'll be rolled out and be available across the whole sector. To make more informed cyber decisions is we partnered with the Australian Institute of Company Directors. And we did this for a number of reasons. They have a one-day cyber for directors course. And we've already partnered, the Victorian government's already partnered with AICD to run executive training, and they do the company for directors course inside the public sector. Now the reason we partnered with AICD is they've developed this course in working with Data 61. They are highly experienced at training executives and highly credible. We did not feel that we could create a course better than they could. So we took their course, right? They also have a full training infrastructure. It's a big earn for them as an organisation. They're not a cheap training organisation, but they produce high quality training. And they have facilities to just, when people want to do the course, they can sign up and do the course, rather than us running 1 or 2 or 3 or 10 a year, which we probably won't do well because we don't have professional experienced trainers. We probably wouldn't create the content as well because we don't have the time and investment to do it. So we went with AICD. And we've also found the executives are more willing to do it because it's something that they can actually put on their CV and their resume because it has market recognition and it's a well-respected course. And the final behaviour change we're doing in 2 parts. One is an awareness video, which I'll show in a second. And the second is we will be developing an ICT asset framework to track the currency of your ICT assets to have visibility. All right, so I think I've spoken enough. I'll show the video, hopefully.
It's a real risk. The software is no longer supported.
I'd love to fix this, I really would, but I just haven't got the budget.
We've had journos, the Premier's office, everyone's calling. People's personal information is out there. This is really happening.
It's a data breach. If we had that budget to update the old software, this wouldn't have happened.
Cybersecurity is your business.
So you'll notice there wasn't actually any useful information in that. And it wasn't intended to. It wasn't about raising capability. It was about raising awareness. And what we very deliberately did there was we linked it to a business outcome impact. Because there is no such thing as an IC risk. There's no such thing as a cybersecurity risk. You have business risks or you have things that don't matter. Right. A server going down is not a risk. The inability to deliver a service because the server goes down is a risk. And that's the communication that we need to do to the executive. So this video will be available, it'll be kind of white labeled, so all the entities can put their own taglines on it at the end, put their own calls to action on it. The blanket one that we'll be sending out and looking for large distribution will be linked to our asset framework. And it'll be encouraging executives to download and read the executive summary of the ICT asset framework that'll show them what the currency is. It'll be a very specific document for executives to say, these are the questions it will answer for you as the organisation. These are the questions you should be asking as an executive. The framework itself is more for the IT workers to put in, or the accountants, or a combination of both. That's not what we're targeting. Our targeting is the execs because we need their buy-in. And if we can get them to say, we need this, we need to do it, then the rest will follow. Because the ICT workers we've been talking to already know it's a problem, right? And they want to fix it for the most part. So what we've done is try to actually concentrate on what's preventing that behaviour from occurring. And fairly universally, our feedback was the executive support. So we're fairly early in the journey, but we did learn one really, really important lesson to date. And we thought this is what the Victorian public servant looks like. As an office worker in our office at 80 Collins Street, sitting on a computer. Turns out this is what the Victorian government looks like, or the Victorian public sector. And that's a sample of 311,000 different people of different races, religions, ethnicity, genders, etc., etc. And what we did find out is people who wear uniforms identify themselves separately to people who wear suits. Right? When we released a video of an office worker, a nurse or a police officer immediately disengaged and disassociated with them. So it doesn't work effectively. So our next round of videos, we will be out there. We will be with actual doctors and actual nurses and actual teachers and actual police officers. And we will shoot it in hospitals and we will shoot it at schools and we'll shoot it with arborists. And we are going to get outside the office. We will not do it inside our office again. The other thing that we've done with the training is we're using caricatures of the characters, the individuals. And what we've done is with their clothing, is we've put them all in casual clothing. Because while someone who wears a uniform to work, or someone who wears a suit to work, or someone wears their grubbies to work, depending on what work they do, people wear the similar sort of things at home. So the training is all around, and the caricatures we're doing is around this home persona. And what we've been advised is this will help reduce that disassociation that we have it. And the faces are so de-identified that you can't identify gender or ethnicity and so forth. Because we don't necessarily need the people to see it as themselves, but we do need them not to see it as someone else. And that's how the training will go through. So those were the key points, probably running a little ahead of time or about on time. Was there any questions anyone had?
What method did you use to develop your personas? Were you like in-house or did you get consultants?
We had consultants in. So basically we adopted it from the ICT Training and Awareness Program. It was one of the big four consultancies, they created it. In our next round, we'll probably add 2 more personas, and those being the information security specialist and risk specialists inside of organisations. And particularly the audit and risk committees are somewhere that we want to spend far more of our time, because like while the ICT aspect of it is important, what we're really trying to drive is better risk management. And what we're trying to do is uplift the capability of those risk professionals to address cyber or information security risk.
Yeah, how hard was it?
Sorry,
So that can be heard
Yes, I know what I'm trying.
sorry, I'll get you next. Yeah.
Interesting that you had to pitch it back to being actually about executive awareness rather than workers. Did you get pushback from executives who didn't see that training or awareness amongst the workers was something that they had to work on themselves?
So I think I did a post on this LinkedIn a little while ago. There's 32,000 board members inside of Victorian government. And that's a really wide spectrum of different boards. And if you look at the entire executive across the Victorian government, which I don't actually have the numbers for, the answer is yes. Some push back. Anytime you do anything on scale, some will push back, some will jump into the middle of it, and the vast, standard bell curve. Most people will go, something I need to do. Neither active nor resistive to it. Some will go, this is incredible, this has been needed, I'm so on board with it. And you'll have people who go, why are you telling me this? Who the hell do you think you are? And you'll have that full spectrum. And we have an acceptable loss, right? We don't have the time and energy to worry about that last standard deviation or those last 2 standard deviations or those 2% or those 3%. They're too hard, not worth our time. So we let them go. And hopefully over time, they'll get pulled up with the rest. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, how were you, and I apologise if I missed it at the beginning, but how were you stood up as a group to do what it is that you're doing? Because I hear the message from that point of being stood up, but I'm in the position of needing to stand something up.
Yeah, sure. So we are fortunate. So the Victorian government has the cybersecurity strategy that's been endorsed by the Victorian Cabinet, which is, you can't go any more senior, except maybe the Queen. So we have that, which gives us some authority. We were given a budget allocation over 4 years, which is just pretty much unheard of, which is really good. But it goes to where we start and where we stop, and I didn't talk about it, probably should have. We are not delivering the training. We are creating the materials, we're creating the packs, and then it's up to the entities to deploy how and when they see fit. So across all our entities, some of them will want to do it, some of them won't want to do it, some will have capacity to do it, some of them will conflict with activities they already have, some of them will be exactly what they want at that particular time, some will want to do it but do it at another time. So we've devolved that decision-making and delivery aspect of it. What we are creating is posters, videos, instruction packs, web-based learning modules, the videos, the ability to edit and do your own calls to actions in them, surveys to test comprehension and awareness before and after the campaigns. So we develop all the tools, but we partner with all the entities for them to deliver how and when they feel is appropriate. No, or we have no authority to make it mandatory. Sure.
That you call on what sort of frequency, if it is not mandatory, but how frequently you suggest or think about this happening in the organization?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. All right. So the question was, if I can summarise, it was basically, how does it work if you don't make it mandatory? The answer to that is, while we don't have authority to make it mandatory inside the entities do. So they can choose to make it mandatory. So for example, Yarra Valley Water may choose to go, all our staff have to do it, and get their executives to make it mandatory inside their entity. Right? Other entities go, oh, we don't like mandatory, we like to bring people on the journey and make them want to do it. Right? Those workforce decisions are best made by the entities themselves because they understand their entity far better than we could. And this is where we'll be doing tracking of deployment. Right? If no one's deploying the tool, there's two reasons for that. It's not good, or we haven't sold it well, or possibly a combination of those two. And if people aren't deploying it, then we will go back and try and make it better or sell it better. If we have to make people do it, then it's probably an indication that we haven't done our job well.
I've got a quick question.
Yeah.
The spreadsheet you had up earlier looked like a typical capability maturity model. Is that something you developed in-house, or is that a standard capability maturity model for awareness and training?
This one?
That's the one.
We created it, but I'm sure it's pre-existed. I can't find it anywhere. So I would love to give you the correct reference of it. I'm doubt that we're the first people to think of it this way. But yeah, I don't know the actual reference. Right?
Can you understand how you're going to measure success out of this and what level of delegation you'll pass down to the agencies for them to also understand how successful this has been?
Yeah, and we just need to be pragmatic about that. If we give people the tools to do it and tell them, hey, it's really good if you do it, even for your own program and your own knowledge and for your own workforce, and then we just tap into the back end of those tools and get the aggregated data out of that. So we won't do separate ones. Some entities will deploy the testing tools, some will not, and we'll just use the sample of the data to be an indication of the broader workforce.
So this is success of completion, or do you have another measure that's like, measuring click-through rates, for example?
At the moment, it's really basic. It's basically it's distribution. We will work our way up to comprehension, and then we will work our way up to behaviour change. So at the moment, it's very, very simple.
Oh, well, thank you, Simon. It's very interesting hearing about how Victorian government's making all of these changes.
Excellent.
If everyone could please thank Simon. I'm sure he'll be around later if people want to catch up with questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you.